Up until this point in the course, we have not taken the time to address the term or idea of sonic art or sound art. At once, these terms are both self explanatory yet elusive. The term sonic art refers to art which deals with the realm of sound, audio, and or the sonic. We will not discuss nor define the term art. I will save that for your art criticism theory and history courses, as obviously that is a whole best reserved for other spaces. An important conversation, but different from this class. Instead, I'm going to assume you have some sort of embodied knowledge and understanding of what art is. However, the terms of sound art and sonic art are less common and therefore less understood. When tracing the birth of sound art, scholars typically pinpoint it to somewhere in the first half of the 20th century. However, the use of the term sound art would wait a few more decades and does not emerge until the 1970s, when it was used colloquially at first by artists of the avant garde scene. At the time, this term was used interchangeably with the terms audio art, sound poetry, sound sculpture, and experimental music. It was printed for the first time in 1974 in one of the last publications by Something Else Press in their Something Else Yearbook 1974. We are going to define the term sonic art and consider it as follows. Sonic art will refer to practices, activities, research, creative work, events, or performances that deal with sound, audio, sonics, listening, or hearing as one of their primary topics or mediums. Obviously, this is a vast definition encompassing many possibilities. As an important note, this definition also allows for work whose medium of presentation may be visual to also be considered as sonic art, assuming that the topic explored is based in the sonic. For me, this breadth and lack of specificity in the term's definition is precisely and perfectly fine. Just as the term visual art is wide-ranging and encompassing, so too is the term sonic art. The strength in such a nondescript definition is that it allows artists to narrow the term to their work or in defining their work as they see fit. It does not force someone to shoehorn or fit their work into a definition or category. Instead, this term can serve as a welcoming place for many activities, practices, and approaches, encompassing them all under a large tent. So, why do we need this term anyway? Well, one critique and question of a broad definition may be, aren't there more specific categories, terms, styles, genres, creative practices, or research practices that could better describe some individual's work? And the answer, of course, is yes. And this is true with all social constructs, discrete categories, classification systems. Boxes allow people to define similarities in their work to other work, to group works together. And from a marketing standpoint, a simple boxed definition creates an easier job to try and sell something. However, this is not flexible enough to account for new ideas or evolving understanding. And that's one of the reasons why this term exists in the first place. As I see it, there are two specific forces that conspired together during the 20th century to force the creation and adoption of the term or idea sonic art. These are the larger fields of art and music. The boundaries of art. The tastemakers, artists, composers, and elites of the 20th century who were in positions of power found themselves driven towards categorization, and definition of what is and what is not art and music based on evolving notions of aesthetics, technical skill, and elitism. Rather than allow for anyone to explore, experiment, or create in the means that they were driven towards, the people in power dictated the definitions of what was good and what could be considered of value. This was mirrored in common culture through notions of conservatism that raised notions of beauty and accessibility of art as being most important. This left those creators and artists whose works did not fit into those notions without the definitions needed to ground their work. At the same time, there were many artists who rebelled against the notion of the gallery and museum as the only arbiters of taste and value. The idea that a work of art could be sound-based makes it difficult to sell as a high-value artifact in a gallery, unless it is a physical sculpture. This is a problem for an art form that may include written descriptions as art, directions for participants, or what might more typically be described as musical scores or compositions. Essentially, it creates a problem that it's not a discrete, unique painting, print, sculpture, etc. Sound art often is an idea, it's elusive, it's time based, multitude that's not a single version of it. In many ways, it's the same type of problems that exist in the field of music. Once the music is recorded and put on a digital format today, it's very easy for it to be shared illegally, pirated, copyrighted, moved around. And it's hard to make sure that the people who made it get money. Of course, people also want to have the high value of being able to own something and say that they're the ones who own it and then look at it in their house and no one else can look at it. Sound art ran up into problems against all of this. At the same time, sound art also and sonic art ran into the boundaries of music. If you're listening to this video before reading through the discussion here, I want you to take a moment and pause the video after I describe this, but grab a new digital note or pen and paper. I want you to contemplate for a moment your understanding of and working definition for music. What types of qualities does it have and what does it exclude? What criteria should it meet? Essentially, I want you to write your current working definition for music. How would you define music? Now that you've had a chance to do that. Music as a term, like art, can be difficult to define as we have an embodied understanding of what music is, but are not often pushed to fully explain and justify it. My assumption is that many of your working definitions include some of the following terms or ideas: melody, harmony, rhythm and beats, notes, pitches. The problem with this definition is that it creates unnecessary constraints about what music is and is not. Generally, until challenged otherwise, most people consider music to be made up of 12 notes that divide an octave and are used to define Western musical scales. However, these notes are a result of Western culture. Other cultures have other ways of dividing octaves and do not use the same set of notes and relationships that Western culture does. Likewise, Western culture often considers rhythm or a beat to be a requisite part of music. But again, this is just one way to divide and organize time, whereas other cultures divide and mark time according to their own systems. The reality is that differing cultures will have differing priorities for what music is. And the oft-cited idea that music is the universal language may be true on some levels, but not in the way that Western society conceives. The idea that music is universally the same, utilizing the same 12-note system with deference to harmony or rhythmic structure, is false and frankly colonialist. Music is many, many things to many different types of people. The first half of the 20th century saw many artists and composers of Western society challenge these conservative notions of music. The Italian Futurists celebrated the noise of the city, discussing the beauty and the sounds of the new everyday. Likewise, artists of the Dada movement found reward in exploring nonsensical spoken word performances. At the same time, composers started to explore the concepts of silence and move away from the conceptual complexity of melody and harmony that defined modern music towards works that were based on sound gestures, sound masses, and qualities of sound. We started to talk about some of this last week as we introduced John Cage. It is during the first half of the 20th century that composer Edgar Varese was credited with coining the idea that music is defined as organized sound. Again, music, the definition of music is organized sound. We are going to define music for this class as being this. Music is the organization of sound, be it by a composer, artist, or listener. The organization of sound by a composer, artist, or listener. So, at what point does something become music? Well, that's something I want you to think about this week. I really want you to think about that. When does something become music if someone simply has to organize it? If a listener can organize it, what does that mean? Can anything we listen to then be categorized as music? Yeah. John Cage would build upon this evolving idea, which would encompass his own compositional activities, including explorations of both chance operations and silence. At the same time, however, Cage was comfortable in allowing people who did not consider his music to be what they considered music to call it something else. Cage saw no point in trying to force someone to view his work under categories or definitions that they fundamentally could not identify with. Cage was not alone. Many musicians and composers of the 20th century, whose musical inclinations took them further away from conservative notions of music, were able to find a home in adopting the term of sound art for their work. So, what is the difference between sound art and music? What gets more tricky is in trying to delineate where sound art ends and music begins. In fact, there's a significant overlap between the two ideas. Music is clearly an art form that deals with the sonic. However, it is also clearly that it includes all music-related activities under the moniker of sound art, which is too reductionist of an approach. Rather, to say that again, it's too reductionist to say that all music is sound art. The reality is that the distinction between the two terms is quite fuzzy. As an example, very few people would consider Beethoven's Ninth Symphony as anything other than music. However, there's a work by a Scandinavian artist called Leif Einges, and I'm not sure how to say his name, and I apologize, called The 9-Beat Stretch, in which he used digital signal processing to stretch the 1 hour symphony over 24 hours of music. Well, let's take a quick listen to that.
What you're hearing.
As you can tell, there's no distinct attacks. There's not the same type of melodic or rhythmic structure we're used to. There's an NPR story on this piece embedded in the page. I'd really like you to listen to the entirety of it. Now, the reality is that both of these works are music. They use music, and they should be listened to as such. However, some people will simply not accept the idea that this is in fact music. Likewise, when we start to think about some of the work created that may fall under the term experimental music, we will inevitably run into people who have a difficult time referring to it as music. On the opposite side of the coin, there are sound artists who take issue with the conceptual baggage that working under the term music implies. Rather than struggle to explain how their work is music or deal with the embedded cultural expectations of what music should be, they choose to utilize the sound art or sonic art label as a way of opening up possibilities for their work. It's important to recognize that sound art essentially has many similarities to music. It's different in that we don't have the same cultural baggage and expectations that music does. Music is not necessarily sound art is not necessarily music. However, there can be quite a bit of overlap between the two. The reason that we're using this term we'll get into in a moment, 2 pages later on, but I want you to contemplate all of this, and I look forward to you responding and thinking about what all of this means.